The good news is there have been very big advances in technology, so that the potential for solar energy, wind energy, have increased greatly in the last few years.
So the European Union has become the first superpower to mandate that 20% of its energy, 33% of its electricity, has to be renewable by 2020.
We see coal-fired power plant being phased out entirely. And we see it being replaced by geothermal energy, by wind energy, by solar energy, tidal energy, wave energy. And we're seeing some enormous advances now in various countries around the world.
I think it's much wiser to invest in proven energy sources like solar, wind, hydropower, but all, of course, in a way that we don't put too much damage on other ecosystems.
In the United States, for example, we have an enormous amount of wind energy. There are 50 states in the United States. 3 of these states, North Dakota, Kansas, and Texas, have enough harnessable wind energy to satisfy national electricity needs easily, without even touching the wind in the other 47 states or any of the vast amount of offshore wind resources that we have. The U.S. state of Texas now has 45,000 megawatts of wind generating capacity, either already producing, under construction, or in the planning stages. That will more than satisfy the residential needs of the 24 million people who live in Texas. We see other developments in the U.S., in California, in Wyoming, in South Dakota, huge wind farms, 2,000 megawatts, 5,000 megawatts, and a lot of U.S. states will become energy exporters because they have so much wind energy to harness. Algeria has announced plans to develop 6,000 megawatts of solar thermal generating capacity to export to Europe via undersea cable. The reason they're doing this is because they want to keep exporting energy, but they know they won't be exporting oil indefinitely. In the desert of Algeria, which is most of Algeria, they have enough solar energy that, if harnessed, could power the world economy. Now, that sounds like a mathematical error, but it's not. The amount of solar energy striking the Earth in 1 hour is sufficient to power the world economy for 1 year.
Up to 1800, roughly speaking, mankind lived from the soil, from the plants, from the wood, from the sun. We will have to return to these kind of sources of energy. However, we will not do that falling back to the first solar age. Yet the second solar age will evolve on a different level of knowledge. Because in the meanwhile, of course, one has all kinds of new knowledge about materials, about how to construct conversion technologies, human intelligence. And human knowledge has evolved, and that is the treasure to be used in order to build the second solar age.
Another example, Indonesia. Indonesia has probably 500 volcanoes, of which 131 are active. This means there's an enormous amount of geothermal energy very close to the surface. Indonesia announced that they are planning to develop 6,800 megawatts of geothermal generating capacity. Of this, 4,000 megawatts will be developed by Pertamina, which is the state oil company in Indonesia. This is interesting for 2 or 3 reasons. One, Indonesia's oil production has already peaked and begun to decline. And indeed, Indonesia is now already a net oil importer. So they really have to scramble. But the oil companies, with their drilling technology, use geothermal energy a lot. So they have a lot of experience with this. Indonesia can run its entire economy on geothermal energy. It has so much of it. In fact, there are probably 40 countries in the world that have enough geothermal energy to provide all the energy that their economies can use.
Basically, everywhere as it is possible to harvest the sun and water and biomass. That implies that the distance between the sites of production and the consumer can shrink, in the sense that when somebody today puts up a photovoltaic roof, he is at the same time a producer of energy as he is a consumer. And that model, that production and consumption move ever closer together, is important to keep in mind when it comes to envisage a much more decentralized structure of energy provision.
We're going to have millions of buildings, homes, offices, factories, industrial parks, shopping malls. Millions of buildings are going to become positive power plants. That is, they will collect all that distributed renewable energy on site. The sun coming through the solar roofs, the wind in the surrounding region, the garbage. If the buildings are in the rural areas, they will collect agricultural and forestry waste and turn it to energy. If they're in the coastal areas, they'll take the ocean and tides, turn it to energy. If the buildings are anywhere, they can use geothermal from under the ground, and they can use hydros.
Many, many mini producers, instead of a few mega producers, in many, many places, and not only in a very few places.
We take the power grid of Italy and Europe and turn it to an intergrid that's smart, distributed, intelligent, just like the internet, same exact technology.
And now here in Europe, we're hearing discussions about a supergrid that would go from Norway to Egypt and from Morocco to Western Siberia, tying together Europe's renewable energy resources, the wind resources from northwestern Europe, the solar resources from southern Europe and from northern Africa, the geothermal resources from countries like Italy, for example, and Turkey.
And I would just imagine every young person under the age of 30, when you're 63, we think everyone under 30 is young, that grew up on internet and Wikipedia and YouTube and MySpace and open source and file sharing. The idea that they can take that kind of network, open source frame of reference to the power grid is a revolution. It's power to the people. It's the democratization of energy. What we need is a distributed power revolution, so we create energy the way we create our information. We create it ourselves, it's renewable, we share it across intergrids like we share information on the internet. That's the future.
So I think if you look down the road toward the future, the challenge is to build a fossil fuel-free electricity grid that would power not just the lights in our house, but our cars. It seems to me right now, given what we know, given the capabilities we have, that this is more promising than this search for the alternative liquid.
What we're looking at is shifting to plug-in hybrid cars. We now have a number of hybrid cars in the world, probably 500,000 on the road in the United States. But once you have hybrid cars, it's a simple step to plug-in hybrid cars, where we would simply add another storage battery and a plug-in capacity so you can plug it into a wall socket and recharge the batteries. Then we could do most of our driving with electricity at a gasoline equivalent cost of under $1 a gallon.
These are the new energy sources. Renewables. We can also increase the efficiency with which we live. We can increase, for instance, patterns of living so that people live nearer where they work, so that they use more public transportation. So, in effect, we use less energy. And it seems to me that this is where much more of our focus of our attention should be. Not where do we get new energy sources, but how do we change our lifestyles? How do we change how we live in ways that reduce our environmental footprint, that reduce the impact that we have on the environment, including reduce the amount of energy that we use.